Welcome to the last video in the series, where we take a closer look at examples of authentic assessment. We're going to circle back to the concept of what it means to be learner-centered, talk about how these can support academic integrity, cultural diversity, and universal design for learning. We're going to try to wrap it all up. I'd like to conclude this lecture and this course by telling my personal story of how I got interested in authentic assessments. I'll never forget the first time I taught a course at McEwen University. It ended in a trough of disappointment. As I stared at the last stack of final exams, I said to myself, never again. I was either going to quit teaching or I was going to make this process of marking something meaningful to me. I wanted grading to be something meaningful to me. So my interest in creating engaging and authentic assessments did not start with students. It arose from my desire to stop the process of inviting repetitive and relatively meaningless student work that I had assigned. I was ultimately responsible for doing this to them and to me. First, I incorporated online discussions. Online discussions, which I recommend even for in-person courses, are authentic insofar as they encourage students to bring their whole selves to the learning process, and talk about their past experiences. It was an important addition because the occasionally large international student population in my courses felt more comfortable writing than speaking. Through discussion, I gained insights into my students' thought processes that I would have never gotten otherwise, and so did the whole community. Then I moved to open book exams with application-based questions, which were relevant to my discipline. I now teach in the Graduate School of Library and Information Science, where students develop sophisticated search skills using a variety of resources. Asking them solely to rely on their memory contradicted the discipline, and I was more interested in their personal synthesis than their memory. This too had a beneficial impact. Asking students for their personal thoughts on core course content and giving them time to come up with application-based answers reduced the inclination for cheating. At the same time, it made exams and papers more interesting to read. I then dabbled with two-stage exams in class to create engagement and peer instruction before I moved away from exams entirely. As I've mentioned before, my favorite quote about teaching is this: what's the best kind of teaching? Well, it depends on the discipline. It depends on the level of course you're teaching. It depends on the student. But the next best answer is students teaching students. Poster presentations in our education department are very authentic. This is something that practicing teachers will be expected to do at teachers' conferences, and it combines instruction with professionally communicating with colleagues in visual and oral ways. Connected to that is the use of peer instruction modules using a variety of tools, such as student-generated infographics and podcasts. I love what technology allows us to do. These support digital media communications and peer instruction because, just like any other discipline, I face the tyranny of content. There are more content areas than I can possibly hope to cover. So I ask students to become experts and develop learning modules in these leadership and management topics like strategic planning, so that they can become experts in at least one of the many topics with real-world relevance. My favorite assignment is a fairly traditional, reflective essay. But here's why I think it's authentic. Because I teach leadership, I can make this essay personally meaningful to the students. The essay asks students to select a leadership theory they feel closely aligns with their personal conception of leadership. They present and critique this leadership theory, and then they explain what concrete actions they will take to self-develop as leaders. This last part of the essay is authentic because every year, I need to complete and submit a learning and development plan detailing how I'm going to grow as a professional over the coming year. I find this annual reflection on professional growth personally fulfilling, and I'm asking them to engage in the same activity that I engage in as a working professional. These essays usually turn out to be excellent, and I learn of students' crucibles, their experiences of prejudice, their triumphs, but most importantly, how they plan to grow. I previously mentioned concept maps, but one of the concept maps are wonderful, and I also have students develop concept maps of how leadership functions. How does successful leadership function? You know, what are the essential competencies of leadership and how do they work? This is a very complex assignment that causes them to wrangle with internal teams, the external environment, advocacy, and social trends. Finally, about 4 years ago, I decided to make one of my assessments mirror my real-world experience as much as I possibly could. I think this statement is true for every industry. We are adapting to trends and inventing new programs and new services. We need to be more inventive, innovative, and entrepreneurial than ever before. These are just some of the examples that I have used personally in my authentic assessment journey. Recently, I finished James Lange's Distracted: Why Students Can't Focus and What You Can Do About It. He has a very simple recipe for an authentic assessment. Have students identify an aspect of the course that interests them, define an audience that should care as much as they do about it, and then present that idea to them. In doing that assignment, they would have to pay attention to an ill-defined task. How are they going to bring it to their attention? What social contexts need to be accounted for? Speaking to students would be very different than speaking to a local community or a political representative. The product would have to emerge. Would it be a report or a podcast or a TikTok video? So that allows for a diversity of outcome. What I like about this approach is its simplicity and its adaptability. This is something that could be implemented in several different disciplines. Returning to the idea of what is authentic assessment, Grant Wiggins says that an assignment is authentic if it's realistic, that real-world relevance, if it requires judgment and innovation, if it asks the student to do the subject, if it replicates or simulates the context in which adults are tested in the workplace or in civic and professional life. It assesses the student's ability, if it assesses the student's ability to efficiently and effectively use a repertoire of knowledge and skills to negotiate a complex task. And it allows appropriate opportunities to rehearse, like I rehearsed this lecture, to practice, to consult resources, and get feedback so that they can refine performance in their products. Authentic assessments can be contrasted with conventional test questions, which are often indirect measures of a student's ability to apply the knowledge and skills gained in a course. Conventional tests have an important place in college courses, but they can't take the place of authentic assessments. If you go looking around on the internet, there are lots of excellent examples of authentic assessments out there from every discipline. Here are just some good examples that I'm sure many of you have probably experimented with already. For nursing, providing a case study of a patient and asking students to assess and create a plan of care. In business, have students develop a strategic, a business, or a marketing plan for real companies in your area. For computer science, have students troubleshoot a problematic piece of code. For service learning courses, consider how a nonprofit agency might be impacted by budget cuts. This would be great for a degree or a certificate in nonprofit management. In the hard sciences, biology and chemistry, return to concept maps. Have students map out a process and indicate what will happen if a change is introduced into the system. For history, have students describe an alternative event and explain how this would have impacted the present world that we live in. Each of these have varying levels of authenticity. Authenticity being the degree of real-world relevance that supports learner-centered assessment, where students are the constructors of knowledge within a powerful learning environment. Thank you very much for participating in this Commonwealth of Learning massive open online course on authentic assessment for online learning. It's been an absolute joy to spend some time learning with you, and I look forward to reviewing your learning journals and your discussions. Thank you.